A good-natured, fun-loving man.
He was just a wonderful person. He was so funny and so charming.
Enjoying his retirement years.
At that point in his life, he was very content, very close to his family, his nieces and nephews.
Is brutally gunned down a month before his wedding.
It was point-blank assassination.
There's a big puddle of blood. Oh my God!
Investigators pieced together a series of clues.
We had to look at what role that upcoming wedding had and what happened.
They have their arguments, they had their differences.
Was the scene staged to cover up an intentional killing? The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
And chased down multiple suspects.
It was a whodunit. We were hoping for that break to come.
Revealing a plot fueled by greed.
He was somebody who had a criminal history of theft and assault.
Just when police are close to making an arrest,
it was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat.
They uncovered damning evidence pointing to a surprising suspect.
You never expect anything like this.
And then all of a sudden, the kill was right in front of us.
In 2014, the sleepy Pittsburgh suburb of Kennedy Township is rocked by a panicked call to 911.
What's going on?
I just come home from work, and my husband, he's been on the ground. He's dead. There's a big puddle of blood.
Police, fire, and ambulance are coming, okay?
Oh, my God!
The woman who made the 911 call, Carol Lapaya, says the victim is her soon-to-be husband, 59-year-old Jack Parks.
When I arrived on scene, the first thing I noticed is that the victim's head was covered in blood. It was on closer examination that you could see it was a gunshot wound. One challenge we had right out of the gate was that there was no casing or gun found. We don't move his body until it can be photographed. It was possible there was a gun underneath him that no one had seen, so we weren't 100% sure if the gunshot wound at that point had been self-inflicted or homicide. We looked for a while. Unfortunately, we didn't find any type of gun.
Detectives searched for any signs of what happened to Jack and who pulled the trigger.
It was pretty clear right off the bat that this was some type of a home invasion or robbery that occurred.
It didn't look like a struggle had ensued in the room, but once you walked through the victim's house, the further you got into it, the more you realized the level of disarray it was in. And as you went into the dining room, you started to see jewelry box here, a drawer gone through here, papers rifled through. Upstairs, there was just complete disarray. The drawers were all pulled out. The clothing that was inside the drawers was strewn everywhere. Jewelry boxes flipped open, empty watch boxes laying there.
We were trying to determine, was the scene staged? Was someone just trying to make it look like a robbery or a burglary, and when in fact they're just trying to cover up an intentional killing where they intended just to walk in and execute somebody? The house was dusted and processed for DNA and fingerprints. We then began to process the outside of the residence, looking for any type of forced entry, and none of that was found.
Our first thoughts were the victim either knew the actor or was familiar with him. That's our first impression. So, who was friends with the victim, who would have access to the victim, who would have opportunity to the victim, and who would he trust?
It really was a shocking case. He was killed execution style. This homicide happened in an area that we don't normally have murders.
Jack's death is the first homicide in Kennedy Township in 10 years. The news stuns his family and friends.
When I got that phone call and I heard Carol's voice, I knew something was wrong. And she said, "Jack's gone." I said, "What do you mean, gone?" She said, "He's dead." And then she said he was murdered. and I just went into shock.
Jack Parks was born the second of 5 kids in Pittsburgh in 1955. Friends and family were everything to him.
Jack always made friends. He was one of the best people I've ever known. He would do anything for anybody. We first met in 1st grade. We hit it off all through high school. And after that, it was a good ride.
Jack was so well liked. He could be charming when he wanted to and funny. He was just a wonderful person.
In 1989, a chance encounter changed Jack's life.
Jack met Carol at the local bar, and I guess they hit it off.
They were 2 peas in a pod. As soon as he brought Carol, we fell in love with Carol.
Jack was very close to his family. He had about 9 nieces and nephews.
Jack and Carol used to have their nieces and nephews over for sleepovers, making the popcorn and just having a good time. You'd have swore that Jack and Carol were the parents. They didn't have kids, so when those kids were around, they were their kids.
Jack had recently retired, but had big plans for the future.
At that point in his life, Jack was very content. Him and Carol were going to get married.
They've been together for over 25 years. Carol in the beginning really wanted to get married, and Jack didn't. And then at one point, Jack wanted to get married, and Carol didn't. And I used to tell Jack, you know what, I like to be living when you get married, when you say I do. And then when they set the date, I was so happy. It was gonna be an exciting, very exciting day.
Tragically, Jack was murdered a month before the ceremony was to take place.
Her and Jack were going to be married on August 31st of that year, and it was really sad. It was so close.
At 5 p.m. on July 21st, 2 hours after Carol found Jack dead, police questioned her at the station.
Talking to Carol was so important because, first of all, we had to determine whether she was or wasn't involved, and we wanted to just get the best timeline from her. During the interview with Carol, she explained that she had left for work as usual, her normal time, about 5:40. She starts work at 6. Everything was fine when she left for work. It wasn't until a realtor called her about a potential buyer for Jack's late mother's home. And when the realtor couldn't get a hold of Jack, Carol started to worry. She tried to call Jack, and there was no answer.
So then she got concerned. He always called her back every time that she tried to get a hold of him. So I think it was approximately about 2 o'clock she left work and then come over and find Jack, of course.
Detectives know that spouses are always the first suspect and must determine if they can trust Carol's version of events.
We have a timeline between 6 a.m. to 3 p.m. when she returns home. In some cases, you know, if a person's a cold-blooded killer, they may have killed him before she left the house, and then all of a sudden she finds him, and, you know, and the killer's right in front of us.
Her demeanor, she was very upset, but you can't take a chance by skipping a stone and not trying to look at her.
Detectives are suspicious of why it took the couple so long to decide to get married, and if someone had cold feet.
Something that we thought is, are either one of them having affairs with someone else? Could that be a possible motivation, and is this upcoming wedding triggering that?
Coming up, detectives uncover a family feud.
They just decided to distance themselves from not let him come to the house.
And learn Jack's inner circle isn't as loving and devoted as it first seems.
Things got more contentious.
As police keep digging, more suspects surface.
We learned of several burglaries.
They had concerns about the employees. they hire criminals.
Just when the investigation is about to hit another dead end,
We had no idea who would have done this.
detectives make a crucial discovery.
It was exactly what we needed.
When we got the phone records back, it was, oh my God.
That was
Kennedy Township Police are investigating the area's first homicide in a decade. 59-year-old Jack Parks was found dead in his home by his fiancée Carol in what appears to be a robbery. But since there was no forced entry, investigators try to determine if this was actually a staged attack and if the motive was something more personal.
when we interviewed Carol, we had to look at what role, if any, that upcoming wedding had in what happened. We had to start looking at every aspect of their lifestyle. What were the family dynamics? We had to chip away at a number of things in their life, things that happened that day, but also things that might have happened in the past that could be a motivation for this murder.
They had their differences. They'd have their arguments, but it wasn't my point to get involved in their squabbles.
We kept talking more and more about any kind of problems that they had had in their home. And I asked her, do either of them have a gun? And she said that they did not.
Carol says she would never do anything to hurt the love of her life. She wanted to marry him. Jack was her soulmate.
Jack and Carol, they loved each other. They felt they were already married. To everybody, they were husband and wife years before, the wedding was planned.
Carol was very upset. It was very difficult to talk to her while she processed that emotion, but then to still get the information we needed to keep moving the investigation forward. To me, that was a sign that she wasn't involved.
With suspicion shifting from Carol for now, investigators explore whether theft was the main motive.
The bedroom was ransacked. The mattress was disturbed. Things were emptied out of drawers.
Carol had indicated to me some items that should be there. Their wedding rings that they had bought. Jack collected some coins. He had some expensive watches. She indicated that the watches should be in the boxes. When we first processed the areas of disarray, none of those items were there. That was our first big clue to go off of. I knew that if we could find that jewelry, we could find who was involved. We didn't know if the person who took it might have given it to someone else, but we had to start with where is it, who has it, and how did they get it.
The next morning, the autopsy report comes in.
He was taken out with one shot and to the right side of his head. It took it to a level where that is someone who probably came there with the intent to either use that weapon to intimidate or control Jack. There was a projectile that was recovered from his skull, and we were able to determine that we were looking for this .380.
So that was a good start for us. Now we knew what kind of gun we were looking for.
During the victim's autopsy, you could see that there were no wounds on his hands at all. There were no scratches. There were no broken fingernails. Nothing that seemed to indicate that he had had a chance to fight back. He had been caught completely off guard.
During Carol's interview, she indicated to police that Jack's nephew, Bradley Johnson, is someone they should look into.
Bradley was living across the street with his mother and father, across the street from Jack. And he was always over there. And from what I understand, he was one of the last ones to see Jack alive.
We made contact with Bradley, and Bradley had told us that he had gone over to Jack's house on the 21st, and he said he got there around 10:30 in the morning.
Detectives find that timing suspicious. They know Jack was killed sometime between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m. that day.
I asked him, I said, Bradley, what did you go over there to talk to him about? And he said, well, Jack's mother had passed away, and he knew that Jack was looking to sell the home. But Bradley wanted to negotiate a deal with Jack, and he wanted to talk to Jack alone because he said, I don't want Carol weighing in on this. I want this to be a Parks family matter, and I want to discuss it with him. In his words, I didn't want her putting her 2 cents in. And that was a phrase that seemed to hint at some kind of animosity.
Bradley tells investigators that he finds Carol too controlling and that she shouldn't have a say in this family decision.
Jack wanted to wait until he could talk with Carol about it, which sort of defeated the purpose of why Bradley had gone there when she wasn't home. So he said he ended up leaving and they were going to revisit the conversation later.
As investigators press him further, Bradley reveals an alarming fact.
We did ask him about any firearms that he owned, and when Bradley told us he owned a .380 caliber pistol, it kind of was like, okay, this maybe something broke bad, because now we know Carol leaves for work at 6 a.m. and Jack's alive at 10:30 because Brad's telling us he's over there.
He indicated he had left about 11:15. With Bradley's timeline, it definitely seemed that Bradley was very close in time to when Jack would have been killed. And he put himself there. He had the same type of gun.
Had the discussion about Jack's mother's house turned fatal?
With the timing of Bradley's conversation with Jack, it made me wonder whether things got more contentious than he was alluding to in my interview with him, or did he leave there upset, or did somebody else come back and do something to Jack? It had to be looked.
Bradley Johnson.
When I found out that Bradley was a suspect, I was mad. I was really upset, knowing that they thought that. But then again, when it comes to an investigation, police are doing their job.
Bradley and Jack had a disagreement, and he admits to owning the same caliber gun.
So that definitely stepped up our interest in Bradley. This is a gun that we needed to take a look at.
Bradley's gun was collected, taken to the lab where it was test fired. The ballistics on the gun did not match the projectile that was recovered from Jack during the autopsy.
With nothing concrete linking Bradley to the murder, he is dropped as a suspect. Detectives also corroborate Carol's alibi.
On the day that this happened, we were able to verify that she was at work and she was accounted for at that time. We were able to eliminate Carol as a suspect.
Looking for new leads, detectives speak to the other nieces and nephews who were close to Jack.
During our interview of Carol, she had told us about her nephew, Michael LaPella, who was almost like a son to her, and he had been at the house a lot.
They got along good. Michael joined the military. Jack was very proud of Michael. Jack took pride in the nieces and nephews because he watched them grow up.
Michael was brought in to the homicide office and interviewed about Jack's murder. And during that interview, Michael had said that he was unemployed. He was trying to seek help through the VA hospital due to his PTSD from being in the Army. Michael had been discharged from the military due to his use of cannabis.
Michael also admits he'd fallen out with the family, including his aunt and uncle, and hadn't seen them in a year.
He specifically denied being over near the victim's house, and he made reference to them being estranged. Michael had a bit of a drug problem, and Carol and Jack decided to distance themselves from Michael and not let him come to the house.
Detectives still need to know where Michael was when Jack was killed.
We knew Carol left around 6 a.m. We knew that Bradley was there about 10:30. We knew Carol found him around 3 o'clock. So there's a window of opportunity of about 4 hours. He told us he was at home in Sharpsburg on the day of the incident, July 21st, 20 minutes away from Jack's house.
He said that his girlfriend had kind of unexpectedly taken the day off and they spent the day together. Nothing out of the ordinary. He gave us some landmarks on our timeline that we could check out. Michael and his girlfriend Melanie had gone and done some shopping in the town that they lived in. He said that he had had a doctor's appointment at the VA hospital later that afternoon. These were things at businesses and locations that we could check from doing surveillance video or getting sales transactions. Michael's girlfriend, Melanie, did corroborate his activities, and she stated they had spent the day together.
It was determined that his alibi had checked out.
A day into the investigation, with Jack's closest circle cleared, investigators escalate the search for the missing jewelry.
We were physically going to many pawn shops to try to see if anybody had sold this jewelry. We didn't get any traction with that.
That's when we started doing a canvass of the neighborhood.
When we were doing our neighborhood canvass, so many people had mentioned near their house there's a meat factory, and they had concerns about the employees. We had heard things like they hire people with records, they hire criminals. From talking to Carol, she said they have a straight view into Carol and Jack's home, and Jack had mentioned sometimes he would let people use his phone or use the bathroom when they were on their break, and it upset her.
In a case like this, you may see, hey, look at this guy, he got some gold on. It's a crime of opportunity.
We knew that they got their morning break right around the time when people stopped hearing from Jack, so we definitely wanted to look into that and see what the consensus was over there.
I think we did like almost 40 interviews of all the employees to see who they were.
One worker in particular piques police interest.
Ronald Blevins was a name that came up from multiple employees in the context of people who had gone over to Jack's. This may be the person that Carol was aware that had come over there. Ronald Blevins was somebody who had had a criminal history of petty theft and assault, so he was on our radar for sure.
Investigators worked quickly to bring Ronald in for an interview.
Ronald indicated that he had known Jack and they were actually friendly, and that's why he was allowed to come into the house when Carol wasn't home. Carol said she would get upset with Jack. She would say, Jack, don't just let anyone in our house. You can't do that. And he would just, kind of shrug it off. But she just didn't want people coming into the house that she didn't know.
Investigators asked Ronald point blank if he had anything to do with Jack's murder.
He said he had no involvement in Jack's death. The day that Jack was killed, Ronald didn't come to work. He had actually taken scheduled vacation for Friday and Monday. Ronald Blevins' alibi checked out, and we were able to eliminate him as a suspect in this case.
Desperate for a new lead, investigators look for similarities with other robberies in the area.
After Jack's murder, we talked to the local authorities, and during that, we learned of several burglaries, one of which an older lady was burglarized, and about $5,000 worth of quarters were taken.
Jack's killer had stolen his coins as well as jewelry. Is this the same person? And could they strike again?
The neighbors were very afraid. We still have a killer out there.
It was a whodunit. Once something like this happened, you think that anything's possible.
Another recent robbery in the neighborhood.
We learned that during that burglary, there were some items similar to what Jack had that were taken, and it was a burglary that happened during the day, which is the timeline we were looking at in this particular incident. Oftentimes in our investigations, we see that residential burglaries are done during the day in bedroom communities where the chance of the people inside the home being at work are better, and that way they can go in and they can take what they need without fear of being caught.
With Jack being retired and home all day, had he caught the burglar red-handed and paid the ultimate price? The neighboring police department already has a suspect in custody.
Vernon Zielinski was identified as a possible suspect in this case. He had been recently arrested.
The items that Vernon was accused of taking were coins. Well, Jack had coins that were missing. So Vernon Zielinski was tracked down and he was interviewed. We really just wanted to do an interview and determine what connection, if any, he had to Jack. During the interview, he said that he had been arrested for the burglary, but that burglary was at an old employer's house. He denied knowing Jack, and he said that the day that this happened, he was actually at work.
We confirmed that through his new employer, that he was working that day, during the time frame that this would have occurred.
Vernon was somebody we were absolutely able to rule out of being directly involved. At that stage in the investigation, we had no idea who might have done this and why.
48 hours after Jack's murder, with no arrests in the case, fear is growing in Kennedy Township.
Everyone was concerned that how in broad daylight can someone walk into a house, kill somebody, and walk out without even being seen.
The hardest thing to comprehend was the murder. It was point-blank assassination. Stone-cold killing. You never expect anything like this. I know I didn't.
Waiting for an arrest, you're still in that daze of trying to process it all. He's not coming back. It's just too unbelievable. Is this gonna be another murder unsolved?
We had a lot of information to go on, and we were constantly moving the investigation forward. People were being eliminated, further suspects were being developed.
3 days after Jack was discovered dead, police get a major break.
A local pawn shop in Sharpsburg, PA, which is another small little borough within Allegheny County, the owner had called the local police due to some suspicious activity. On the day of the incident, July 21st, he said a gentleman came in with a cachet of gold and was trying to sell it to him.
What the employee found to be concerning was, first of all, the jewelry was manipulated. It was very distinguishable pieces, but they had been, it seemed to be hammered or just manipulated in a way that would make them hard for law enforcement to identify. It threw up a red flag to him, but also he seemed to think that this was a person who had sold him stolen jewelry in the past. So he didn't buy the jewelry, but he also had the foresight to know he wanted to see where this jewelry might have come from. He knew it was important to get a picture of it. So he took a photograph of the items that this person was trying to sell.
He provided us with the photographs, and they were taken to Carol, who viewed them.
She became very upset. She started crying, and she said, "That's our jewelry."
It felt like we were closing in. Based upon the photograph of the jewelry, we were able to get that out to the local department. They could share it with the pawn shop owners in town if anyone comes in with this.
Investigators hope they can identify the seller.
The pawn shop owner was able to give a good description of the person who brought the jewelry in. A younger white male, black hair, and thin build. That description was provided to the local police chief in Sharpsburg, and he thought that fit the description of the white male from that area. It gave us a very good lead in this case. A photo array was put together to include 8 individual photographs, and they were shown to the shop owner.
We have a set of instructions that we give them, and we say, the person that we're looking for may or may not be in here, but if you see the person indicated on the lineup. So once he reviewed the photo array, he did identify who that person was. It was a huge break. It was exactly what we needed.
Coming up, police find stunning evidence pointing to Jack's killer.
In the video, we knew exactly who it was.
This was a shock to everyone.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
But making an arrest wouldn't be easy.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Until investigators find proof no one can deny.
Those records
Identified the man who tried to pawn murder victim Jack Park's jewelry. His name, Brian Gibbons.
He's been a known thief to the local police department. We went after that lead strong.
We were feeling pretty confident that Mr. Gibbons may be our man, or at least know who our man was. We were very excited and very motivated to go find him.
Brian has a long history of petty crimes, but investigators need to determine if he's a killer. 4 days after the murder, they get a warrant to search his home.
Specifically, we were looking for any of the very distinguishing items that Jack Parks had. Unfortunately, we didn't find any of the victim's jewelry in the house, but we did find some items that did turn out to be stolen from someone else.
Based upon the search at Mr. Gibbons' residence, we were able to arrest him and have him sent to the county jail.
Investigators questioned Brian about Jack's missing jewelry.
He said that he didn't have anything to do with it. At that point, we were trying to determine if perhaps he'd been given some jewelry to sell, that maybe he didn't know its origin and he went to go sell it. We really just wanted to see if we could come up with any connection to rule him either in or out on the homicide of Jack Parks.
Brian tells detectives he doesn't know the victim and has never been to his home.
He said he had no connection to Jack at all. He denied having any knowledge of the Jack Parks homicide. We asked, well, what's your alibi? And he goes, I was arrested for entering an abandoned house that day. And that was confirmed. Brian was not the killer. He had a solid alibi.
It was clear that he was not the same individual who had come in to the store on that Monday that tried to sell the jewelry.
The pawn shop owner mistakenly identified the wrong person.
The investigation kept hitting dead end after dead end.
We thought we had it, but then once we eliminated him, we took a pause. We had to step back a minute, not start all over, but then keep everything else in perspective.
While detectives hunt for new leads, Jack's loved ones struggle with their grief. Instead of looking forward to Jack's wedding, 5 days after his murder, they attend his funeral.
When he told me he was going to get married, his brother and I would have stood up for him. I was proud because I was never a best man. And there I was, carrying his casket. God, to have something like that happen in such a quick time, it's devastating to everybody.
You feel the hurt, but it really doesn't sink in until the funeral's all over. And then the shock is over. It's reality. He's gone.
Fearing the case could go cold, a week after the murder, police step up the hunt for Jack's stolen jewelry, hoping the culprit is still attempting to sell it at a pawn shop.
We all just sort of fanned out and we took particular geographical areas. We knew there was still a person that was out there trying to sell Jack's jewelry, and we had to just keep holding out hope that the pawn shop would take their identification, that they would keep good records. That's what kept us going, honestly. There is a detective in the city of Pittsburgh who is a pawn shop records analyst, and I reached out to her and I told her what items that we had missing, and on August 4th I heard back from her, and she told me that she had found the jewelry where it had been sold.
Investigators race to the pawn shop.
We had to go take a physical look at it, see who, if anybody, was on camera. Some store policies, all they have to do is take an individual's driver's license number. They don't even have to make a photocopy of it. So we were trying to remain optimistic that somehow we would get an image of the actual person who tried to sell that jewelry. It could have been anyone at that point.
The pawn shop has surveillance video, and what detectives see on tape is jaw-dropping.
It was, oh my God.
We knew exactly who it was. In the video, it was Michael Apaya, which was Carol's nephew that Jack raised like one of his own.
This was a shock to everyone.
When we first had dealings with Michael, early on in the investigation, he did provide an alibi about businesses he was at, doctor's appointments.
Michael had his girlfriend Melanie saying that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed. So it was kind of going back, trying to retrace what he had initially told us.
We still had to do a little bit more digging. We had to work on if we were missing something. Early on, when we talked to Michael, he had given detectives his phone number. I wanted to get his phone records.
While investigators wait for those records, they call Michael back in.
We are going to interview him and see what he has to say now that we have him on tape pawning his uncle's jewelry.
we decided that it would probably be ideal to bring Michael and his girlfriend Melanie in at the same time, being that she was the person who was providing an alibi for him, and chip away at that and see where the truth lied. We took them both back to our office, and they were interviewed in separate rooms. Michael, in his interview, was initially very adamant that he had nothing to do with this. He denied involvement with the murder, involvement with the jewelry, and he just would not deviate from that.
Melanie stands by her story, too.
She provided alibis for him and just denials.
Melanie is pretty much telling us that he was with her during the time that Jack would have or could have been killed.
She was just defensive and trying to argue with what we knew was not true. And that was that he had sold Jack's jewelry. We showed her a picture of the jewelry, and she tried to say it was hers. And we knew that was a lie.
With neither Michael nor Melanie cracking under the pressure, detectives need something to break the deadlock.
When we got the information about the cell phone records, it was a huge break. We were very happy that it finally had come through. It was like everything came full circle.
Parks was shot to death in his own home. Investigators get the break in the case they needed: incriminating cell phone GPS data.
When I got Michael's phone records, I started to see where generally he spent most of his time, which was consistent with his home.
He told us he was in Sharpsburg, 20 minutes away from Jack's house on the day of the incident.
Parts of his alibi checked out, cell phone data-wise, but there was an anomaly where about 11:45, his cell phone pinged over in the area of Jack and Carol's house. To me, the significance of 11:45 was it is in this time where Carol can't reach Jack.
It would be impossible to be in Sharpsburg and your phone ping off a tower in Kennedy Township. The amount of distance between the two, it wouldn't be possible. He was not at home. He was over near his uncle's house.
So 11:45, Michael's phone being over there was an aha moment. Those records don't lie.
Detectives want to see how Michael will react when confronted with his own cell phone records.
It was like he had just got smacked in the head with a baseball bat. He became very quiet, took a second, and he just let it all out.
I was suffering from PTSD, and the morning of July 21st, I asked Mel to take a ride with me. She just drove down with me, and I parked her car. I told her to wait. She never got out of the car. She had no clue where we were going.
Michael's explanation of why he went to see Jack only raises more suspicion.
About a year ago, I was accused of stealing jewelry, and I wanted to make amends. I wanted to fix it. I knocked on a door to apologize and talk. At that time, he became hostile, and he choked me and swung at me.
His story changed to self-defense.
He had two hands around my neck, and at that time, I felt my life was threatened, and I had a pistol, 380 on me. It went off.
Reconciling that just wasn't possible. Jack was shot one time right close to his ear. Basically, someone held a gun to his head and executed him.
He fell to the floor, and I panicked. Ren grabbed jewelry, and I left.
Michael tells detectives he sold the jewelry for $1,000. Even more shocking is what he spent the money on.
You stated that that's one of the people you sometimes purchase narcotics from.
Yes. I gave him about $600 to $700.
In addition to that, several days later, what did he give you?
He gave me heroin.
Michael was following a path of substance abuse that was getting to be more addictive drugs, and his use was increasing. It wasn't recreational anymore. It was more the behavior of an addict.
It was heartbreaking for us to know that someone who was almost like Jack's son, a very close family member, would do something like that in exchange for a couple of dollars to get high.
I believe Michael went to that house to take jewelry. He knew Jack was there, and the only way he was going to get that jewelry is if Jack was dead. He walked up to the house, and as soon as Jack met him at the door and turned his back to him, he shot him, and he fell, and he died instantly.
On August 5th, 2014, Michael LaPaya is charged with first-degree murder.
To say to Carol, we know who did this, it was hard, but the hardest answer that we had for her is when she said, Michael who? And he had the same last name as her, really. It was hard to tell her that, it's your nephew. And it just hit her, and she was very upset.
You never thought that would happen. It would be that person.
It's still to this day so hard to believe that somebody that they loved, Michael, could have done something like this. I mean, what he did, I can't describe. There's no words.
At trial, Michael is found guilty. On December 9th, 2015, the 24-year-old is sentenced to life in prison.
He took a loving, caring man and just executed him. There was no winners. We lost Jack. Who won? Nobody.
I would never forgive him. Michael took away my best friend, my brother. He took away a lot from me. To this day, I still hate the guy.
Jack will never be forgotten. In the beginning, it's hard talking about a loved one without
Nicole.
There's not enough to call it a suicide.
Tonight, 2020's investigation lighting a fire under an 8-year-old cold case.
The family's strongest argument is this abrasion.
Follow along as we retrace Annie's final hours, far from home.
So Annie might have been here on Halloween night.
No stone left unturned, doing the job they say the police didn't.
They treated this evidence like trash.
From a pastry shop.
She goes, oh my gosh, that's her. She was here.
To a funeral home.
We always thought murder right away.
The Capitol to the state penitentiary.
Our first question was, did you kill our daughter?
And finally, the police, with nothing new to say to the parents, but talking to 2020.
What do you say to this family who says you didn't do your job, that you left them hanging?
Answers for Annie.
Good evening, I'm Elizabeth Vargas. David is on assignment tonight. At a time when so many of you have your children home for the summer, these parents have a never-ending mission. Still trying to find out what happened to their teenage daughter, how she died 8 years after the fact. 8 years after the police say they do know what happened. What will you decide tonight? Join the conversation. We're live on Facebook and Twitter as Deborah Roberts tries to find answers for Annie.
Alexandria, Virginia, a stone's throw from the nation's capital. An upscale suburb in Fairfax County with historic cobblestone streets, pleasant homes, and top-notch schools like West Potomac High. On Vantage Drive, it was the picture of tranquility until early Halloween morning in 2008.
And then this is Annie's room.
Is it hard to come in here?
No, it's joyful because it's Annie.
It was barely 6 a.m. and Dan McCann was saying goodbye to his 16-year-old daughter, Annie, before heading off to his managerial job with TSA in D.C. His wife, Mary Jane, a former White House IT worker and now stay-at-home mom, was on her way to upstate New York to visit the couple's son, Sam, in college. Annie, a high school junior, was a passionate artist and good student who played basketball and made her mom laugh.
Annie was funny, quirky, witty.
She was just a delight. She was just a person that I feel like everybody liked Annie.
Former classmate China Johnson Owens first met Annie in 7th grade.
Annie McCann was an angel on earth, honestly.
Her parents say Annie was young for her age, sheltered and a homebody. There was no Snapchat or Instagram yet, and the McCanns heavily monitored their daughter's time online.
She could barely work a flip phone, and she just got her Facebook account.
So I said, yes, you can have the Facebook account, but I get to look at it when I want. I want the passwords, everything.
What's here that she did?
It wasn't an issue since Annie preferred drawing and painting anyway.
That is really pretty, though.
Yeah. Look at the colors.
Her work decorating the family home.
She was talented.
Very, very much so. I always put everything in a frame for her so she knew that it was important.
Her big obsession was capturing her cherished dog, Breezy Max.
She absolutely loved her dog, Breezy.
That's
and
a
he's
painting.
At the top of.
I actually thought that was a photo for a
No.
second.
Annie's artistic touch even extended to Halloween with goodie bags she insisted on making.
She was too old to trick or treat, so she transferred her enthusiasm into giving the gifts out.
But just hours before trick-or-treaters would arrive, the first hint of trouble. Annie hadn't phoned her mom, something out of character.
Oh, she always called me like clockwork after school.
Mary Jane knew her daughter's routine. Straight home after school, and if neither mom nor dad were home, she'd call. Up in Ithaca, New York at Sam's College, when Mary Jane didn't get that usual ring of reassurance, she worried.
You know, as a mom, you just know. I got this gut. Something's not right. And so I called a neighbor. I said, are any signs of Annie? No. Any signs of the car? No.
Annie used the family's white Volvo to get to and from school.
Thoughts going through my mind. Oh my God, what if she's, and you're thinking, what if she's, oh my God, what if she's in a car accident? Please God, let her be okay.
A panicked Mary Jane calls Dan, who rushes home and finds the house phone ringing. Would it be Annie or someone who knows where she is?
I answer, and it's an automated message from the Fairfax County Public School System, reporting that your son or daughter was absent today, the whole day. I almost collapsed.
So now you realize she was never even at school.
Right. So I call the police. Get over here now.
There's little to go on, and the Fairfax County officer who arrives isn't overly concerned. Maybe this is a typical teen acting out.
People were saying, don't worry, she just ran away, she'll be back. You know, kids do this all the time. It's not uncommon. Don't worry about it.
But Mary Jane is worried. Her daughter is far from rebellious and only recently had gotten her ears pierced. She's diligent about keeping them clean with a first aid spray Bactine. Keep that in mind. You won't believe how important it will be later. With no sign of Annie, her mom is frantic and begins making the achingly long 6-hour drive back home to Virginia.
What state are you in as you're driving?
I know I drove right through somebody's farm and finally got on some highway. I mean, we were like just stunned in the car and, you know, driving fast and not stopping and like, why can't I get this car home faster? We have to find Annie.
We didn't know where the hell to go. We didn't know what to do. We did the best we could.
How did you get through that first night?
I don't know.
It was torture, wasn't it?
It was torture, yeah.
But the torment is only beginning.
When the call came in, I was told it was a dead junkie behind a dumpster.
Not even 48 hours later, homicide detective Sean Jones responds to a call.
I really honestly thought it would be a 20-minute type it up and be done. Not so much.
But the call isn't in Alexandria, it's here. The Perkins Homes housing project in Baltimore, Maryland, 50 miles and another world away from the McCann's bucolic neighborhood. And behind a dumpster in this section of the so-called Charm City, a man taking out the trash makes a gruesome discovery. And it's no junkie at all.
So you find the body of a white teen girl at a predominantly black housing project. What was your first thought?
That it was a homicide. It was a homicide. And we treated it as such.
Jones, a 25-year veteran Baltimore cop, knows right away this is an unusual case.
When you first looked at her, was there an apparent cause of death?
No.
Did it look like she had been beaten up?
No.
The Perkins Homes covers several square blocks in a high-crime area, just minutes from Baltimore's famed Inner Harbor and Camden Yards. Soon enough, Detective Jones discovers that the dead girl has a backpack nearby and papers that reveal a stunning fact. She's not from Baltimore, not even close.
I find a hall pass for Fairfax County High Schools. I find her driver's license, and I have people back at the office call the Fairfax PD.
A half hour later, the identity is confirmed. It's Annie McCann. Detective Jones leaves the ugly crime scene, driving to suburban Virginia to break the news to the McCanns in person.
How as a parent do you even...
You can't. You're in shock.
Do you ask any questions at this point, or are you just collapsed in grief?
You're collapsed in grief.
How did a sheltered girl from the suburbs wind up here? Amazingly, Annie McCann herself may have left behind the biggest clue. When we come back, the note found in Annie's bedroom. Is it a roadmap to what or who led to her demise?
She'd say, Dear Mom and Dad. She'd never write a note not saying Dear Mom and Dad.
What does it reveal? See what happens next. Nightfall in Baltimore, trapped between a dark harbor and sinister sky. A city with a long history of murder and mystery ever since Edgar Allan Poe wrote and died here. Now it's the case of Annie McCann that captivates. How does a white 16-year-old girl from the Virginia suburbs wind up dead here in the projects? Her stunned parents haunted this Halloween night by a note left on their daughter's bed.
This morning I was going to kill myself, but I realized I can start over instead. If you really love me, you'll let me go.
What started as a suicide note was beginning to sound like a runaway note. Goodbye.
I know I'm only 16, but I'm almost 17. I'll be careful. That's how that note ended. I'll be careful.
Why would she run away? Was there something brewing that maybe...
Well, apparently.
But was there something possible that you could look back on and think, maybe she was upset about this?
No. Dan called me and told me, and I'm like dropping the phone like, what?
What, indeed. Equally as confounding is what they will learn later, that Annie had taken $1,000 in cash, money she'd stashed away, all her favorite clothes, even a box of Cheerios. But nothing in the note hints at where she's going.
Did Baltimore make any sense to you? Was there any connection to Baltimore?
No connection to Baltimore. No sense at all. Annie could not even find her way to Baltimore.
There were all sorts of unusual angles to this.
To Washington Post Metro writer Tom Jackman, the mysterious death of a 16-year-old girl is big news.
Beyond the fact that a suburban girl was found dead in the inner city of Baltimore, there's no real explanation for how she died.
You don't see this very often.
No.
It wasn't the usual bill of fare for Baltimore homicide detective Sean Jones either.
90 to 95% of the cases we're dealing with are African American males that are shot on a street corner. I'm obviously going to look at this twice and not just glance over it as your average everyday case.
Then the case seems to crack like one of those famous Maryland crabs. First, police find Annie's Volvo abandoned at a gas station. Then, a tiny clue, a smudge. It's a fingerprint that matches someone already in their database. Could it be Annie's killer?
We had to get the fingerprint processed, and then once we got the name back from the fingerprint, that's when we moved on that.
Turns out the print belongs to a teen boy who says he and some friends came across the car in the projects. He says Annie, face down in the back, is already dead. So, as twisted as it sounds, they dump her body and go joyriding in her car.
So these boys just dumped her body?
Yes, ma'am.
And took the car?
Yes, ma'am.
One young man connected to the group, Darnell Kinlaw. Remember that name because you'll hear it again. But police don't charge him or anyone with assaulting Annie, in part because of the condition of her body. They're certain Annie was not beaten, strangled, stabbed, or shot.
When I initially met the McCanns, I made it very clear that I didn't know what we had, and that the autopsy, 99.9% of the time, is going to give us more clarity on what we're dealing with.
Then the autopsy results are in, and they're a surprise to everyone. Annie had a small amount of alcohol in her blood, but a large amount of something else. Lidocaine.
Lidocaine. 100 lidocaine.
It's a drug you may have heard of on those medical shows like Grey's Anatomy.
Nasal speculum and lidocaine.
To finally relieve your pain, now's the time for lidocaine.
It's also a common numbing agent in all kinds of over-the-counter products, including Bactine.
Relieves pain on contact. Bactine.
The antiseptic Annie had for her newly pierced ears.
Did you even know what Bactine was at that point?
Yeah. I have kids myself. I knew exactly what it was. And I knew what the active ingredients were.
But it's there in black and white. Annie died of lidocaine poisoning. Back at that gas station, crime scene investigators find what in any other case might be an innocuous piece of trash. But now Detective Jones considers it a smoking gun.
We found near the car a Bactine bottle that had the lid removed. It's not a screw top bottle. It's something that requires a little bit of force to get off.
And Annie's DNA is discovered on the exposed part of the bottle. The medical examiner who did the autopsy won't guess how the lidocaine got into Annie's system, calling it undetermined. But the seasoned detectives have no doubt it's suicide.
But who kills themselves with Bactine?
People kill themselves. I've been in homicide for 15 years, and they get very creative. And this is just one of those methods.
To the authorities, this was a pretty open and shut case. She died of a lidocaine overdose. Problem is, it's so rare to find that someone died of that kind of overdose that it's going to lead to some questions.
This doesn't add up. This can't be. This is what you came up with, that she drank a bottle of Bactine?
And the McCanns are taking notes on other things that don't add up.
It was sound of the Baltimore police to consider suicide. It is reprehensible to conclude suicide.
They don't buy it, as they explain in an article they later write. If Annie was going to kill herself, they ask, why go all the way to Baltimore to do it? And if she drank that Bactine, why did the police not find her fingerprints on the bottle?
Her prints and our prints should be all over that bottle. Who wipes fingerprints while killing themselves?
And who writes a to-do list like Annie did on her hand if they're planning to end it all, reminding her to do her chores and say her prayers?
We thought it was a baffling mystery. Nobody's heard of anybody overdosing on Bactine, much less a kid from the suburbs who didn't seem to be that unhappy with life. And so we continued to press forward with the story.
And the story was far from over. When we come back, the McCanns are about to get disturbing new details about their daughter's death, not from detectives or the medical examiner. Try the funeral director and why she thinks suicide is out of the question.
We always thought murder right away.
You thought murder right away?
We did.
It's a ritual no parent should ever endure. Dan and Mary Jane McCann bury their daughter Annie a week after her death in this cemetery not far from their Virginia home.
Please, get any justice, please, please, please.
But no one is resting peacefully. In a curious and cruel blunder, the McCanns say the medical examiner's office failed to restore 2 of Annie's organs after her autopsy.
Your daughter's heart and brain were not returned to her body.
No.
How is that possible?
I don't know. You tell me.
The McCanns are outraged. They say it's unheard of and wonder if the medical examiner could somehow lose their daughter's heart and brain. What else was botched? That's where Diane Downey comes in. We tracked her down at this Alexandria funeral home where she spent 25 years preparing bodies for burial. She says she was unnerved after receiving Annie's.
What did you think?
There's absolutely no way this was a suicide with all the trauma on her body.
Trauma? Dan and Mary Jane say police told them there was none. So what about the goose egg-like bruise on Annie's forehead? So unsightly the McCanns hesitated over an open casket.
I kept going back to the detectives, but they kept dismissing it as, no, they were just minor abrasions.
They were told minor abrasions, no evidence of an assault. And they see this. And so now they're probably really thinking there's something more here.
Downey was reluctant to share her suspicions with the grieving family. But the McCanns' heartbreak and bewilderment only grew much later when they would get their daughter's autopsy photos.
And I know these are hard for you to look at.
They're convinced they see a cigarette burn on her forehead, a mysterious letter J on her ankle, and worst of all, they think they see signs of a sexual assault.
I was horrified. It's like, oh my God, my daughter was tortured.
The McCanns suspect that their daughter is a victim of a crime, especially when that funeral director points out what she sees as another bizarre detail: Annie's fingers. It looks to her that they're wilted.
Her fingers were shriveled like they were raisins, like her body had been soaked for several hours.
Did that concern you?
Very much.
Was this a result of someone trying to wash away evidence?
Baltimore City Police will not reopen its investigation.
The case is closed.
Police may be standing down, but the McCanns are only ramping up their own investigation, and the media is all over the story.
The McCanns have made it known they were not happy with their daughter's death investigation.
And the parents are relentless.
The police do nothing and they sweep it under.
Baltimore police never honestly investigated Annie's death.
They begin emptying their savings, even Annie's college fund, to get at the truth, buying billboards around town, and then assembling their own dream team, starting with perhaps America's most famous medical examiner, Dr. Michael Baden, a fixture on Fox News.
You looked through the materials. What struck you right away?
What struck me right away was the circumstances first, that she was found by a dumpster. Somebody dumped the body there after death, and usually that happens in homicidal situations.
Baden says in 50 years of death investigations, he's never heard of anyone killing themselves by drinking Bactine. And in his opinion, there wouldn't be enough lidocaine in one bottle to kill Annie anyway.
So you were convinced that Annie McCann did not commit suicide by drinking Bactine?
That was my opinion, yes.
That's when it went, for me personally, it went, holy cow, she was murdered.
Still, no change in posture for the Baltimore police.
If you come across being angry, no one's going to help you. You come across, if you're nice, no one's going to help you.
Disappointed and desperate, the McCanns march on, all the way, in fact, up to Capitol Hill.
This committee
to Senator Charles Grassley, one of the country's most powerful members of Congress, chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee.
If I can help, I want to help.
From Iowa, he isn't even the McCann senator, but they don't call him Hawkeyes for nothing.
Do you think the Baltimore PD blew it?
It looks to me like when they don't answer questions, they raise a lot of unnecessary suspicion. And if they want to avoid this suspicion, then it's pretty simple. Just come clean.
Grassley sent off official letters to the Baltimore police and the FBI. They wrote back defending the investigation and stand by the conclusion Annie most likely died from self-ingestion of Bactine. But Grassley also wrote to the makers of Bactine, the Bayer Corporation, and got another story entirely.
What exactly did you hear from Bayer about lidocaine?
Pretty simple, that one bottle of Bactine would not cause a suicide.
In fact, Bayer claims it previously told the Baltimore police the same thing.
Back in here.
Her body was found back in here?
Yep, right in here.
Which leads us to this man, the captain of the McCann Dream Team.
It's not your usual death. This is a mystery that stumped everybody. I mean, there's other
Jim Consis, a private eye and former Baltimore cop himself, now on Annie's trail.
Her name's Annie, white girl from Virginia. No, know her.
He retraced his steps with us.
I canvassed the whole area, went door to door for months.
Literally walking me through his investigation.
Hey, guys.
Approaching anyone and everyone he could, like these folks at the Perkins homes.
So we're just trying to fill in the blanks on how the body got behind the dumpster.
But have you ever heard of anybody talking about the case? No?
Did you hear any scuttlebutt about it when you moved in? Like
no.
What might have happened to her?
No.
Then hitting the road.
Now we're getting in the heart of Fells Point.
So Annie might have been here on Halloween night.
Yeah, she could have been.
The key for Consis, determining where Annie was after leaving home and with whom.
What would this area be like on Halloween?
Packed, because all the bars are down there.
In fact, Fells Point is one big party on Halloween, with throngs of young people celebrating and taping the festivities. This footage shot the very night Annie disappeared. Consis says Annie may have been among the revelers. Then a big moment on this quiet block of Albemarle Street.
This is basically Little Italy. You got all the Italian restaurants here.
He arrives here, Vaccaro's, a Baltimore bakery famous for its pastries. When we come back, A very sweet clue. And the trail doesn't end in that bakery. Who are the McCanns about to question inside this prison? Stay with us. Biccaro's Pastry Shop is a landmark in Baltimore's Little Italy.
You want an espresso?
Famous for cappuccino and cannoli, it would become the setting for a stunning development in the case of Annie McCann.
What brought you here?
I know she had a sweet tooth, and her body was found over there. And she loved yogurt, pastries, and I'm thinking, why not take a shot?
It's 3 months after Annie's death, and the McCann family private investigator Jim Kuntzis is showing Annie's picture to workers here.
So you came up to the counter here?
Yeah, I came up to counter.
A clerk takes a look at the picture.
One guy goes, "Oh yeah, I think I remember her. Yeah, she was cute."
Then a server sees the photo, and it's as if someone dropped a pile of dishes.
Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. That's
You
her.
remember her?
She was here.
Here, alive and well, sipping a cappuccino with extra whipped cream. Then a jaw-dropping revelation. Annie was not alone.
Yeah, she was with another girl. And then that's when the description came out.
A sketch artist is soon giving that description a face.
So you got the server here to give you the details to come up with the sketch.
Right, and then once the sketch was complete, she looked at it, she says, "That's her."
This is Annie's companion, according to a waitress. A haunting image of a tall, dark-haired woman, older than Annie, late teens, early 20s, disheveled, tired, looking like trouble.
She had heavy makeup. She had the ugliest fingernail polish you would ever see. It's puke yellow. Puke yellow. She had heavy-duty bags underneath her eyes, like she was tired.
As a detective, what's going on in your head at this moment?
I'm thinking, oh, that's good. We got a hit.
So you thinking this woman could be the key to solving this death?
Right.
This is big stuff, isn't it?
No, it ultimately does not have anything to do with Annie's death.
Sean Jones, the lead Baltimore detective on the case, says they looked into it, and he is not impressed. Not by the sighting of Annie, not by the mystery woman with her.
But if she's sitting and having coffee or a dessert with a disheveled young woman, that doesn't set off any bells for you?
Of course it does. It's important, but ultimately we weren't able to verify that it even happened.
The McCanns also released this sketch of a woman seen with Annie in Little Italy the day before her death.
The McCanns publicized the sketch, hoping someone will recognize the girl with puke-colored fingernails, one person who might possibly be able to shed light on their daughter's death. There have been many leads over the years, but they've never been able to track her down.
Every time they would find a lead, then they, hit a dead end, and it's like the mystery continues.
Just when many might have given up, the case of Annie McCann takes another strange turn. Nearly 3 years after her death, a murder with what seemed to be eerie parallels makes the news in Baltimore. 26-year-old Lakeisha Player is murdered and her car stolen. When police name the killer, the McCanns are flabbergasted.
Police believe the killer is this man, 21-year-old Darnell Kinlaw.
Darnell Kinlaw is accused of murdering Lakeisha Player in her Kentucky Avenue home this month and stealing her car.
The same Darnell Kinlaw previously questioned in Annie's case, and who the McCanns believe had been involved in tossing their daughter's body and taking her Volvo on that joyride.
That same guy then gets arrested for murdering someone and taking their car. It's a big coincidence.
Annie's case comes roaring back into the headlines.
The arrest was of 21-year-old Darnell Kinlaw for the murder of his girlfriend. Kinlaw was eventually charged with the unlawful taking of Annie McCann's car in 2008.
Awfully close to the same kind of circumstances.
I'd argue otherwise. He shot her and stole her car in a domestic incident. Has no similarities to Annie's case.
Do you think he knows more than he's told you?
No. As a matter of fact, I think that it tells the opposite, that if he were to murder someone, he's going to use a gun, he's going to use the standard method, and that he's not going to poison someone with lidocaine.
For years, the McCanns have wanted to question Kinlaw themselves, convinced they might be able to get something more out of him about Annie's death. Now, on a gray June day, nearly 8 years after Annie's death, they will get their chance. Kinlaw has surprisingly agreed to meet with them. Dan and Mary Jane leave their Fairfax County home for the nearly 3-hour ride across Maryland.
Are you nervous?
No.
Oh, yeah. Because I know that we might not get anything.
Yeah, that's what I fully expect. They might accidentally tell the truth or do it on purpose. We're going to interview one of what we believe are 5 thugs, at least 4, and we believe 5, who dumped Annie's dead or dying body from her car and then took the car for a joyride. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses.
Praying as they drive and strategizing.
We want to know the circumstances under which he found the car, found Annie. Had he seen her before? Had he seen her with anybody else? And can he please find it in his heart to help us find out who, not him, murdered our beautiful daughter.
Coming up, are the McCanns face-to-face with their daughter's killer? Does Darnell Kinlaw have answers about Annie? Watch what happens next.
"2020 continues with Answers for Annie."
Dan and Mary Jane McCann drive 150 miles across Maryland, doing the kind of detective work they say the Baltimore police are not. They're going to question Darnell Kinlaw, a young man they believe was involved in dumping their daughter's body and joyriding in her car in Baltimore nearly 8 years ago. Kinlaw's now doing 30 years for murdering his girlfriend, Lakeisha Player, and taking her car.
That takes a lot of guts. For these parents to walk into a maximum security prison and sit down and interview a man who they think may have killed their daughter?
He was on the other side of thick glass. We could hear each other very well.
They make small talk with the killer and even pray together.
And I said, Darnell, I take it from your letter, you're Christian. And he said, yes. I said, would you mind if we started with a prayer? And he said, no. And he joined us.
Then Dan gets down to brass tacks.
Our first question was, this is maybe the hardest question we're going to ask you, DJ, or maybe the easiest. Did you kill our daughter? No. You know, we had to ask, okay.
They say Kinlaw seemed genuinely upset at times, but as he looked into their heartbroken faces, they say he offered nothing that would end their misery.
Nothing. So we've worked a long time to get to see Darnell Kinlaw. Finally got to, and we got pretty much what we expected, which is nothing. We learned that he knows almost nothing about Annie's death.
Weary after struggling nearly 8 years now to prove that their daughter didn't take her own life, the McCanns' anger toward the Baltimore police is as raw as ever. We questioned lead detective Sean Jones about the McCanns' accusations, and we also confronted his boss, Colonel Stanley Branford.
The McCanns say that the Baltimore Police Department took the easy way out. By labeling this a suicide, they were able to wash their hands of it and move on to another crime.
I'm sorry that they feel that way, but that's simply not the way we approach this case. I can tell you that this case has been thoroughly investigated, not only by us, by the FBI, that we asked to come in and evaluate our investigation.
Doesn't this family deserve more answers?
We've given them all we can give. We cannot provide answers that we do not have. We possibly believe that Annie McCann committed suicide.
Suicide. But this is a girl who lived in the suburbs. Why would she drive 50 miles to a housing project in Baltimore to commit suicide?
Well, that I can't answer because I don't know the mindset of Annie at that time.
But police do share stunning evidence with us the McCanns did not. We already knew about the letter Annie wrote saying she was going to kill herself and changed her mind. But now police revealed their investigation found other notes in which Annie talks about suffering with anorexia and depression. She writes to a friend, "My suicide has nothing to do with you." In another note, "Pressure has gotten to me. I can't do it anymore." And no one blamed themselves for this. This is all on me.
In all of her writing, she had indicated that she was leaving, and she expressed to some degree that she was tired of living.
In response, the McCanns insist Annie did not intend those as suicide notes. One was found crumpled up under her bed, the other partly crossed out.
Now, my heart goes out to her parents. We have responded to every request that they made. We responded to every piece of information that came in.
After 1,200 hours on the case, the Baltimore Police Department stands by its belief that Annie took her own life by drinking Bactine. It's a critical question at the core of Annie McCann's death. Is there enough lidocaine in a single 5-ounce bottle of Bactine to kill a 16-year-old girl? The McCanns' medical experts are at odds with the Baltimore ME. So 2020 contacted Dr. Bill Mannion, a board-certified forensic pathologist. He estimates he's determined cause and manner of death in 2,500 cases over the years, but not one of them involved Bactine or lidocaine.
Bactine, I had never heard of that before. To be honest, I didn't know it was capable of killing you, but it is capable because it has lidocaine in it, and lidocaine is a toxic drug.
He says a bottle of Bactine does contain a potentially fatal dose of lidocaine.
Yes, there is enough in a bottle of Bactine to kill someone. Even in a half a bottle, they're roughly 2 grams, and that would be enough to cause death.
Even the McCann's own expert, Dr. Bodden, says some of their worst fears about what happened to their daughter are unfounded.
The funeral director felt convinced that she saw signs that Annie might have been sodomized. Did you see any indication of that in either the photos or in any of the material you reviewed?
No, I didn't. Well, I don't see evidence that she was sexually assaulted.
As for that distinctive-looking letter J on Annie's ankle, Dr. Bodden says it may just be an accidental pattern from blood settling.
It was the way the lividity, the blood settled in the body after she had died.
So you don't think that was a marking, a letter, some kind of a tattoo?
That's correct.
You don't think so?
I do not think so.
There's also some talk that there may have been a cigarette burn on her head.
I don't think it was a cigarette burn.
You don't think that was another sign of some kind of abuse?
No.
On one of our visits with the McCanns, they show us bins of evidence they say the police returned to them.
How long has it been since you've gone through these things?
Years.
And there, among Annie's things, a discovery that seems to surprise even her parents.
Shouldn't take that from me.
Digital camera.
Her digital camera still sealed in a police evidence bag. Is it possible this has gone untouched and unnoticed for nearly 8 years? Mary Jane plugs the memory card into a laptop. When we come back, what Annie's camera saw. Stay with us. Nearly 8 years after Annie McCann's strange death in Baltimore, her parents do something they say they've never done before: search the memory card of her camera, stored among evidence in their garage. This is what they find: 14 photos, apparently taken by Annie.
It says May 2008.
But the pictures couldn't be more innocent. Later, Baltimore police tell us they checked that camera years ago. Yet another disappointing dead end. But the McCanns are determined to keep fighting.
Her death needs to be changed to homicide.
The McCanns feel that the Baltimore PD botched this case. Did you
Yes.
botch it?
No, ma'am. Not at all.
What if you're wrong? What if there's a murderer out there and you missed it?
I'm not.
You're convinced that this is a suicide?
Yes, ma'am.
No doubt in your mind?
None whatsoever. There is absolutely no evidence to indicate that this is a murder.
Recently, Mary Jane took another road trip. An emotional journey to Baltimore.
We're gonna go meet Wanda Player. She's just a really very special lady.
That special lady Wanda is Lakeisha Player's aunt. The McCanns bonded with her when the two families were attending court appearances for Lakeisha's killer, Darnell Kinlaw.
It looked as if the body had been dropped from the sky.
I could hear my mum screaming, and by then I just knew.
It just wasn't right, so it fills you with a cold dread.
So here we are coming to the stage where the serial killer effect kicked in.
Early in the morning of the 28th of August 1981, a commuter discovered the mutilated body of a young girl dumped by the Thames in Windsor. Unable to pinpoint exactly where she'd been killed meant that finding the killer was like looking for a needle in a haystack. All the police knew for certain was that they were looking for a violent and sadistic individual who took pleasure in inflicting pain, and that he was likely to do it again. Built on the banks of the River Thames in Berkshire is the town of Windsor. It's home to Windsor Castle, which has been an official residence of the British royal family for almost 1,000 years.
Windsor is a very, very busy town, very busy tourist town. However, the village of Windsor, the residence area of Windsor, is very local, just like any other village, and everybody knows everybody, and everybody knows everybody else's business.
On a bright, sunny Friday morning in August 1981, Kenneth Linney of Thames Valley Police received a phone call, starting a case that would become a 30-year personal crusade.
I was at home and I received a call about 6:30 in the morning to say that a body had been found on the banks of the Thames in Windsor. I immediately attended.
When Detective Superintendent Linney reached the scene at 6:45, he was met by a horrific sight.
I arrived at Barry Avenue, where the body was in a face-down position, naked, that of a teenage girl, and it transpired that it was found by a man on his way to work. He immediately notified the police. I then made various phone calls and got other officers out to form an inquiry team and the uniformed officers to seal the area off, and from there it went on into a general investigation.
There's no attempt to conceal the body, in fact, far from it. And one can only speculate as to the significance of this, but it could be that leaving the body in that condition to full public view might have been an additional twist to the humiliation of the victim.
Houseboats moored just meters from the body were immediately investigated.
All those boats were stopped from moving, and officers then started interviewing the occupants to see if they'd heard anything during the night.
By 7 a.m. they had ascertained that no one had heard anything, and Detective Superintendent Linney continued organising the investigation.
I notified then the Home Office pathologist. I then formulated a small incident room at Windsor Police Station until we had identified the body. It was very important to find out who this girl was. No girl had been reported missing in the Windsor area.
Almost 13 miles away near Hanwell in West London, mother of 3 Carol Walterton made a worrying discovery about her 17-year-old daughter Claire.
Went to wake her up and she wasn't in her bed, and it just wasn't right, so it fills you with a cold dread.
A worried Carol went to work, whilst in Windsor the police investigation continued.
It looked as if the body had been dropped from the sky due to the fact there was no blood or anything outside the basic body area. And bear in mind that there were severe wounds to the body. This was a problem for us. But we could find no forensic evidence as to where it was dropped from.
The forensic team then went about doing a procedure called taping.
Taping is done with sellotape to take any particles off the body. It's laid out then and sealed and used later on then for forensic report purposes.
In the early 80s, forensic scientists could only compare and match fibre samples. So until they found a comparison, the tapings were sent for storage. Then a preliminary investigation was carried out by the pathologist at the scene.
The wounds that were on the body could have been done in situ, where the body was found. But the body was definitely unconscious, if not lifeless, when it was laid on the footpath.
The pathologist found that Claire's throat had been cut, and she'd been sadistically mutilated. It was too much, even for the most experienced of officers.
The injuries caused to the girl, horrific injuries that were caused to her, and how she must have suffered. And I think it affects you. I had 4 daughters. And I could see my teenage daughters in the same situation. So it does affect you.
It wasn't long before this horrendous and baffling murder made the national news.
I went to work and heard on the radio that they'd found somebody, her body, and I just knew it was her. I just knew it was her from where they found her in Windsor, which wasn't far from us. I don't know why, I just knew it was her, so I went into a complete panic. I phoned all the friends that I knew to see whether she was there. I phoned her work, and they were very cross that she just hadn't turned up. So I got home and went straight to the police station.
Once Claire had been reported missing, police quickly made the potential link.
The Metropolitan Police rang to say that a girl was missing from the Hanwell area. So we've notified them again, and officers came down and they identified the body.
Certain they had the right person, it was time for the police to tell the family and confirm Carol's worst fears.
Yes, it was her. After they looked at photos and things. And I can't even begin to describe what it was like after that.
Claire's older brother Nick arrived home, hoping his sister was still just missing.
After I heard it on the radio and everything else, and I made my way home, and as I was walking down the pavement, I could hear my mum screaming indoors. I could hear her screaming, and by then I just knew as well. And I think it was the police or someone that answered the door, and I think I just turned and said, "Is it?" or something, and they said, "Yeah."
Thames Valley police officers wasted no time looking into Claire's background.
I went up with another officer to Yedding Lane, to the family home, and there spoke to Mr. and Mrs. Wilson. They, of course, were in a terrible state, and I then again got officers to sit with them and left them to mourn their fate. It was a terrible shock, because the girl was used to going out during the day, and she was a local girl, and was well liked by everybody in the district.
On a council estate, there wasn't too much to do, but you have lots of friends, so she was always with friends, and, well, we always had a house full of friends. I think that was more her enjoyment. And also when she got her job, that became the be-all and end-all of her life, because she loved it so much and obviously loved the people there as well.
The next morning, the sun may have risen as usual, but for Claire's mum, Carol, the world as she knew it had ended.
All I can really remember is the house being full of policemen. It was just basically showing photos, and so really then we were dealing with it the next day when we knew it really was her, and been dealing with it ever since.
Whilst the family began a lifetime of grieving, the police continued with their investigation, determined to find Claire's vicious killer.
It was decided that an incident room, a major incident room, should be set up in the Metropolitan Police District.
Pete Byrne was a young policeman at that time.
I was involved in the investigation, in that I was a young detective and was part of the 50-strong team of detectives that worked on the investigation.
The police's first job was to build up a picture of Claire and her final movements on that fateful Thursday night.
Claire was ironing, and we said, "Are you going out tonight?" And she said, "No."
Me and Claire was just sitting in the kitchen having a chat, which was unusual really. We was having a good old chat and everything, and she weren't going out that night. And that, you know, But the funny thing was, I remember, God, we must be growing up because of the way we was talking to each other. But I don't know, she was staying in and that was it.
But when we got home, she had gone out. She was 17, it wasn't a problem. But she was always in by 10 o'clock or abouts. But I thought 17, okay, it's 11 o'clock, you know. It's always the first time. But then when she didn't come home, couldn't sleep at all because it just wasn't like her. She'd never been away all night unless we'd known about it. But then I heard laughing outside and I thought, oh, she's home. So I went off to sleep.
It didn't take long for police to piece together Claire's last night.
On the Thursday evening, Claire had gone to see her boyfriend, who ran an amusement arcade on the Uxbridge Road at Ealing. She had left there around about 10 p.m. Normally, he would have given her a lift home, but they had a slight disagreement, and she refused a lift. So she walked along the Uxbridge Road in the direction of her home in Northolt. Her boyfriend did attempt to get her into the car, stopped, asked her to get into the car, but she refused. That sighting of Claire being spoken to by her boyfriend is the last known sighting of Claire alive.
The boyfriend was immediately treated as a suspect.
He said he went home then by 10:30 that night, but he was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Even though the police had been left with no clues, could they have already managed to find the murderer? In August 1981, 17-year-old Claire Walterton had been horrifically murdered and dumped in Windsor, and so far, no forensic evidence had been found. Police had quickly pieced together Claire's final movements, identifying the last person she was seen with, who was arrested for murder and questioned.
Inquiries in relation to his whereabouts later on that evening revealed that he had gone home and was seen by a neighbour walking a dog shortly afterwards, so therefore he was ruled out as being the potential attacker of Claire.
With their only suspect now eliminated, the police looked at using the power of publicity.
There was a lot of media activity, television and all, up at Hanwell. And of course the papers then had the large columns on it.
Information about Claire's last night was released by police to the press.
Two ladies came forward following publicity and said that they'd seen a girl dragged into a car at the junction of Uxbridge and Yedding Lane about roughly around the time that Claire was last seen. They couldn't give any descriptions. All they could say was a dark-coloured car.
Keen to get the most from their only lead, police weren't afraid to try experimental techniques.
I resorted to hypnotists actually interviewing some of these people because we felt that if you can probably refresh someone's memory by that means, then, of course, we may come up with something that the person doesn't think of normally.
Hypnotism didn't seem to have the desired effect.
Whether that person that the lady saw was Claire is unknown. A large part of the initial investigation centred on trying to identify that vehicle, but it was never traced.
The ladies were so vague about this. They thought a girl was pulled into a car. There was no screams, nothing whatsoever. And it was some distance away they saw it. So there was no evidential value, really, in that particular incident.
Disappointed but undeterred, the investigation team continued with their inquiries.
The incident room then, once we established it at Norwood Green, became a very busy place because we had to do a lot of house-to-house inquiries from Hanwell down the Uxbridge Road right up to the top of Yedding Lane, which would have covered the area where she would have walked. Then other inquiries had to be dealt with. You had inquiries, national inquiries, you had inquiries dealing with people with previous convictions for that type of offence or for sexual offences. So there was a lot of work to be done. and a lot of foot slogging, to put it plainly.
For some on the team, this was all a new experience.
It was my first ever murder, and I was just learning how things are done on a major investigation in terms of the system. There was no computer as such, so everything was paper-based, but everything had to be done in a clear and methodical way so that nothing was missed.
There was a huge amount of work to be done.
The police inquiries, the witnesses, the incident room sometimes picks out something which is unusual from statements or movements or a person, the background of a person, and they have to be followed up, and they're known as actions. Actions are then dealt with by detective officers who are out on the ground. It takes a long time. The average working hours during the day in an inquiry like that can be anything from 12 to 14 hours a day. It's a lot of work.
After months of fruitlessly investigating every possible avenue, police were getting desperate.
Clairvoyants came forward. So many people came forward because it was a nasty murder. And the press gave it a lot of publicity.
With nothing to lose, a clairvoyant was introduced to Carol and the family.
She got in touch with them and they were clutching at straws. And she stayed for a couple of hours. But she kept saying things that Claire would have said, but Claire would never have spoken the way she was speaking, and she kept making out she was talking to her, which I found so upsetting, because if Claire was going to talk to anybody, she would have talked to me. Sorry. So, yeah, I had to ask her if she would go in the end, because she'd really overstayed her welcome.
In the spring of 1982, over 6 months after Claire Walterton's mutilated body was discovered in Windsor, the police still didn't have a single lead.
We tried everything, and with the result, of course, we didn't get anywhere. We had all our exhibits. They were put in storage in 1982. And then, as I say, I thought at that stage that we'll never solve the case unless, because of the sadistic injuries that were caused, were we dealing with a serial killer.
It was a horrible thought. Claire's killer probably wouldn't be caught unless they killed again.
This was someone who was really, really sadistic. And that was the type of person we were looking for.
The mutilation, the clearly sexual nature of the crime, suggests that there's a distinct possibility that the individual would strike again.
The failure to track down Claire's murderer was a big blow for everyone concerned.
You have to remember what things were like back in 1981. DNA as an investigative tool didn't exist. There was no CCTV. Mobile phones were very, very rare, and automatic number plate recognition didn't exist. However, you can only do what you can do, and if all the normal lines of inquiry haven't produced anything, then unfortunately you have to be pragmatic, and the investigation is wound down.
Well, it's disappointing that you like to get a result. You think of the girl lying on the pavement in Windsor, and it affects you. I don't care how hard anybody is, but it affects you. And it affected other officers at the time.
The chilling thought that Claire's killer would strike again never left the officers involved in the case. And in December 1984, Detective Superintendent Linney received the news he'd been expecting for over 2 years.
I had a phone call from officers over at Denham to say that they had found a body on the golf course. They told me that the body that they had was of a girl, naked and with horrific injuries. Now, I thought, well, this is identical. The modus operandi kicked in. The modus operandi is the method used by criminals, the same method that is used. And that is the basis of serial killers. So here we are coming to the stage where the serial killer effect kicked in.
Now investigating two similar killings, Thames Valley police were forced to wonder, had Claire's murderer struck again? Just over 3 years after the unsolved murder of Claire Walterton in Windsor, a mutilated body of a woman called Deirdre Sainsbury was found dumped at a golf course in Denham. It was a discovery that grabbed the police's attention. The body found on the golf course had chilling similarities to the murder of Claire Walterton.
As soon as I heard of this incident and the fact that it was identical more or less to the girl that was found in Windsor, Claire Walterton's name, of course, was there, printed all over it.
A murder investigation was immediately launched.
The police publicised the fact of the murder, and by chance, a man had seen Deirdre get into a vehicle on the South Circular Road in Richmond. That man had only recently read an article in the Reader's Digest which talked about the dangers of hitchhikers, and he had the presence of mind to recall the index number or registration number of the car that this hitchhiker had got into.
It was a huge piece of luck.
Police from the Denham inquiry, having received the registered owner of the vehicle, went to the house of Colin Campbell, who was the registered owner. They searched his property and found in the garage the clothing from the girl found on the golf course at Denham.
Police arrested and interviewed 37-year-old travelling salesman and keen amateur hockey player, Colin Campbell.
He admitted picking Deirdre up, stated that he chatted to her en route. In doing so, he gave his name, or his first name, and he felt, as he was getting on so well with her, he would try it on. He did. According to him, she retaliated and hit him, and then he hit her. But he stated he hit her so hard that she became unconscious. He stated he then panicked because he'd given his name to her, and in a panic he then hit her about the head with a hockey stick, which is in the back of his car.
Campbell also admitted mutilating the body, allegedly to make it look like a maniac had done it. Convinced that there was a strong connection between Deirdre and Claire's killings, Detective Superintendent Linney went to see Campbell, hoping he might also confess to Claire's murder.
He was absolutely so suave, so complete, answered everything that I asked. Windsor? Oh yes, he'd been to Windsor. He'd been everywhere that I mentioned. But I had nothing whatsoever at that stage to connect him with Claire's murder. Nothing had been found at his property. And so I was left as I was in the beginning. And which was rather sad actually, because I thought that he might just break, but no.
It was disappointing, but the investigation into the brutal murder of Deirdre Sainsbury moved quickly.
Having been interviewed, admitted being responsible for Deirdre's death, he was charged with the murder and stood trial at Reading Crown Court. His plea in court was not guilty to murder. He stated that whilst responsible for Deirdre's death, he killed her whilst suffering an epileptic episode.
The jury chose not to believe an epileptic episode could explain this brutal and sexually motivated killing. In July 1985, just 6 months after her death, Campbell was convicted of Deirdre Sainsbury's murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. But Detective Superintendent Linney wasn't satisfied.
It was too much of a coincidence that we had the modus operandi of a man who was sadistic when he dealt with Deirdre, Sainsbury. And the same man, in my opinion, committed the murder of Claire Wolterton. I had to sit back and just wait and wait, because I felt this. He might talk later on. This happens. They sometimes do, if there's something on their mind.
Unaware of Kenneth Linney's theory, as the years went by, Claire's family tried to cope with the huge void that had been left in their lives.
I think about it all the time. Always remember birthdays. Christmases is very difficult because she was Christmas. Holidays were difficult. In fact, you spend a lot of time thinking that you shouldn't be doing holidays, Christmas and things like that, because it didn't feel right without her being there.
For me, Claire was Claire. I can't explain to you how that is. Claire was just a happy-go-lucky Claire.
Most memories I have are quite normal memories, because having a meal was just never having a meal. It was always laughing, having a meal at something that she'd either done or was doing while you were having the meal. So mostly, when we sit down for dinner, I often remember some of the silly things she did. You know, she would either have peas up her nose or ice cream all over her face, or she would fill her mouth up with food and then laugh with her mouth open. It sounds awful, but when you're having a meal, it's actually quite funny.
Well, with my brother, it really affected him badly. He had a nervous breakdown and everything. So in the end, I didn't just lose the sister, I lost half of the brother as well, because he just weren't the same ever since.
In 1996, 15 years after his conviction for murdering Deirdre Sainsbury, Colin Campbell appealed.
He stated that whilst he was guilty of causing her death, it wasn't murder.
At the appeal, he put forward the same defence as his original trial, but this time with the backing of an expert, who stated that due to being on the wrong medication, an epileptic episode could have been to blame. Campbell's conviction was quashed, and in 1999, a retrial ordered.
At that retrial, Campbell proffered a plea to manslaughter, which was accepted by the Crown, and he was therefore convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment again, but with a minimum tariff of 1 day.
The presiding judge, Mr. Justice Gage, said that whilst the court accepted that at the time of the killing Campbell's responsibility had been diminished, he still constituted a danger to the public, so couldn't be released without going through a parole hearing. It wasn't the result he'd hoped for.
And at subsequent hearings before the parole board, it was deemed that he was too dangerous to be released.
As the years went by, Campbell remained in prison, but the unsolved murder of Claire Wolterton was never forgotten.
We didn't close the case completely, of course. You never do. We carried on taking inquiries and questions and answers from people, for other forces ringing up. This often happens, and you compare notes.
Police remained determined that they would bring Claire's murderer to justice. By 2011, the depraved murderer of Claire Wolterton still hadn't been found, although police did have their suspicions about Colin Campbell, who was in prison for the strikingly similar 1984 killing of Deirdre Sainsbury. In 2007, Thames Valley Police had started looking at cold cases headed up by Pete Byrne. Claire's case was about to turn a corner.
In 2011, we had the capacity to commence a reinvestigation and a review into Claire's case. What we were looking to do was to use advancements in forensic science in the intervening 30 years to see if we could potentially identify the person responsible for her death.
What the review team found was to be key in moving the case forward.
One of the items that we submitted for additional forensic work was the tapings. These tapings had been originally taken to potentially obtain fibres. However, we knew from other cases that had been investigated by other forces within the UK that now you could get DNA that had been captured from those tapings.
The evidence was sent to LGC Forensics near Oxford for DNA analysis.
Tapes were examined microscopically and small sections were cut out and submitted for DNA profiling.
Pete Byrne contacted Kenneth Linney, who had retired, to tell him a cold case review was taking place.
Which I was delighted about, because I thought something might happen or come from that.
It didn't take long for the lab to come back with a result.
A mixed DNA profile was obtained which appeared to be from Claire Waterton and from an unknown male. We used that profile of the unknown male to search the National DNA Database, and this identified a list of potential contributors. Colin Campbell was amongst those individuals.
It was a name that was well known to everyone involved in the original 1981 case.
The moment I saw his name, I knew that he was a convicted killer. So I was obviously really, really excited.
The match to Campbell was strong, but it wasn't strong enough to guarantee a conviction.
At that point, they were able to say it was a 1 in a million match probability. Whilst that's good, normally for DNA, it's a 1 in a billion match probability.
A 1 in a million match probability meant that there could be up to 60 other individuals in the country who the DNA could belong to. 1 in a billion would mean it almost certainly came from Campbell.
So we needed additional forensic work to take place, which involved using a professor of genetic statistics from UCL College in London. That was going to take time, and also we were doing additional tests on other tapings that had been recovered from Claire's body.
In 2011, having been in prison for 26 years, Campbell was coming to the end of his sentence for what was now the manslaughter of Deirdre Sainsbury.
Campbell was a Category D prisoner, which meant he was allowed access out into the open, and obviously it was a potential danger to members of the public, the fact that this man potentially now was a double killer. So we had to make contact with the prison service, get him recategorised so that he was sent back to a closed prison.
Finally, after months of waiting, there was news from UCL College in London.
We had work completed by this professor of genetics who was able to say that the match probability, in his opinion, was 1 in a billion of Colin Campbell being the donor of the DNA found on the tapings.
The news meant that Kenneth Linney's original hunch in 1984 about Campbell had been right.
When I found out that Colin Campbell had been identified through DNA as being identical to a person's hair, his hair, which had been found on the tape taken at our mortuary, I was delighted.
On November the 27th, 2012, 31 years after Claire was killed, Colin Campbell was arrested. Police decided to question him.
Campbell showed no remorse whatsoever, and I got the impression that he felt that he was a victim, in as much that he had epilepsy, it had been wrongly diagnosed, he'd been given the wrong medication years ago, and it's other people's fault.
My lifestyle meant that the way I was, I wasn't averse to being friendly with the lady.
Yeah.
I may well have known a series of ladies.
Okay.
Claire may have been one of them. No, I don't. She looks like any girl I may have played hockey with. She looks like any girl I may have met through work.
Okay.
Actually, she looks like a happy person, and I'm glad about that. No, I don't recognise her.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's not to say I never ever knew her. I just don't remember her.
To my mind, had you committed that horrendous act against Claire, you would have known what you'd done, and you'd remember it. But he was almost blasé about the fact, well, I can't remember what I was doing. We consulted with the Crown Prosecution Service. They agreed that Campbell should be charged. He was charged.
Once Campbell was charged, it was time to inform Claire's family.
Somebody described it as like a fresh scab that had been picked off. It was like an old wound that had been reopened, and that described it quite well for me.
On the 15th of November 2013, Colin Frederick Campbell stood trial at Reading Crown Court for the 1981 murder of Claire Walterton. Claire's mum, Carol, was there from the start.
It was very, very, very hard and very emotional and very upsetting.
Colin Campbell entered a plea of not guilty.
Campbell couldn't run the defence that the epilepsy was the cause of his actions which resulted in Claire's death. That was because the experts had given evidence for him in relation to Deirdre's death weren't happy to say that epilepsy could be responsible for two homicides.
Claire's mum, Carol, had her own way of dealing with the grisly details of the case.
I didn't stay in for all the nasty bits at all. But what I was in there for was quite difficult.
Claire's family had tremendous courage. Claire's mum wanted to come to court. She wanted to make sure that the man responsible for her daughter's death was convicted. But at the same time, and rightly so, she didn't want to know the full details of what happened to her daughter.
The prosecution called on their trump card, the DNA.
The key item was the DNA evidence. That's what brought the case to court in the first place. And when a DNA expert tells a jury this DNA is 1 billion times more likely to belong to Colin Campbell than anyone else, I think that was the key bit of information.
Faced with such compelling DNA evidence, Campbell put up his own defence.
He couldn't recall ever going into the amusement arcade where Claire had been that evening, but said he may have gone in there, and had he gone in there, he may well have spoken to her, and he may well have touched her, and that's how his DNA got on her body. What was interesting was that the taping that from where the DNA was obtained was marked as being taken from Claire's buttocks, so therefore the fact that he was potentially saying was innocent contact made that extremely unlikely.
The defence were, if I recall, trying to sort of blur the lines a little bit and discredit the DNA, but I think when you say it 1 billion times, that's pretty damning.
At the beginning of December 2013, the judge sent the jury out to deliberate.
The jury took quite a long time for it to come out, to make up their mind, which was just a nightmare again. You don't realise how much that is chewing you up inside and how much tense you are. And that.
After 3 excruciating days, the jury came back, and Campbell was convicted of murder. A few days later, the sentence followed. The judge, Mr. Justice Spencer, stated that only Campbell would know the true circumstances in which he came to pick up Claire Walterton that Thursday night in 1981, but that he was certain he did it with the intention of sexually assaulting, mutilating, and ultimately killing her.
Colin Campbell was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Claire Walterton. He must serve a minimum of 24 years. By that time, he'll be 90 years of age.
For Claire's family, it was a bittersweet moment.
I started to get fed up with people going, oh, now you'll have closure, because you don't have closure. She's still gone. She still went through something that was horrible. I mean, I really do say I am really pleased that they got him, but having it all raked up again was really difficult.
What he got and everything else weren't even long enough, as far as I'm concerned.
He took a beautiful life away. A beautiful life. Somebody who was just coming into being a girl, a woman. And that's just not fair. It's not fair.
Kenneth Linney, who had been involved from the very beginning, was there to hear it all.
The judge, of course, made it quite clear to him when he sentenced him that he wasn't going to get away with the epilepsy excuse that he gave before. They couldn't produce any witnesses to say that it was epilepsy. And the judge made a comment that if the Court of Appeal had known his background, he mightn't have had his sentence quashed. And it was nice to know that he was convicted and rightly sentenced to a long term. He will never be released from prison.
Although former Detective Superintendent Linney wasn't the only officer with a vested interest in the outcome.
Since 1981, Claire's case has been at the forefront of everyone's mind that worked on that case. When I got my current job, when I met old detectives that worked on Claire's case, they always asked me, what's happening with Claire's case? They were all extremely pleased when we got the result and Campbell was convicted. So much so that they held a reunion 6 months after the trial where they just wanted to meet up, talk about the case and just say well done, because it was all part of their life.
After 32 years of trying to solve this brutal and bewildering case, Kenneth Linney could be satisfied they'd got the right man.
How many more people would he have killed had he got away with the Denham case? Because if you get someone who starts that activity of killing young girls and causing horrific injuries on them, when do they stop? That's the question. And I believe that we did stop the makings of a serial killer.
Campbell was in his late 60s at the time of his conviction for Claire's brutal murder, which means it was unlikely he'd ever be released. Finally, Claire and Deirdre's families could